Kay lived in a clay pot, and when the queen grants him a wish, his answer astonished her. The twin sons of Helios Prime cast long shadows across the ancient marketplace of New Athens, where weathered stone pillars stood like silent sentinels of a once glorious civilization. Amid these ruins, nestled at the foot of a colossal Corinthian-style column, lay an oversized clay pot, something most locals simply stepped past without a second glance. But this was no mere discarded piece of pottery. It was the home of Dean Gans, former captain of the Earth Federation's elite shadow operations team. Dean lay sprawled in the entrance of his humble abode, his muscular frame basking in the morning's warmth. His neatly trimmed black beard caught the golden light, and his silver-gold shorts, his only garment in the heat, reflected the brightness of the new day. After 15 years of combat operations across 3 galaxies, he had chosen the simple life on the fringe planet, perfectly content. He stretched his bare feet out in satisfaction and adjusted his position to catch more of the sun's rays. The native aliens, tall, elegant humanoids with shimmering skin and crystalline hair, had long grown accustomed to the eccentric earthling who had taken residence in their market. They had even begun to respect him, though few understood his choice of simple living. A shadow fell across his face, obscuring the precious sunlight he was enjoying. Standing before him was the most striking alien woman he had ever seen, creating a halo effect around her head. The royal robes she wore seemed to change color with every movement. "You're blocking my sun," Dean stated bluntly, closing his eye again. The queen's melodious laughter echoed across the marketplace. "Of all the earthlings I've met, you are certainly the most unique." She stepped closer, her shadow still lying between Dean and his cherished sunlight. "I have come to thank you for what you have done." She paused. "For helping my people, the water crisis last month, the merchant disputes in the lower district, the children you rescued from the collapsing building." She paused. "You've done so much for this city despite choosing to live as you do." Dean shrugged. "I didn't do it for thanks. Nevertheless, I owe you a debt," she declared. "Name your wish, and if it is within my power, I will grant it." Finally, Dean opened both eyes and looked directly at her. The queen caught her breath slightly, unused to someone meeting her gaze so boldly. A glint of amusement flickered in his dark eyes as he said, "Actually, there is something you could do for me." "Yes?" she asked, leaning forward expectantly. "Could you move about 2 steps to your left? You're still blocking my sun." The queen's crystalline face showed surprise, then bewilderment, and finally what might have been curiosity. In all her years of rule, no one had ever responded to her generous offer with such a simple, seemingly indifferent request. "That is all you want?" she asked incredulously. "For me to move out of your sun?" "Yep," Dean replied, closing his eyes again. "It's a beautiful day, Your Majesty. A shame to waste it by standing here making grand offers." The next few days brought an unexpected shift in Dean's sunbathing routine. Queen Astria began appearing frequently in the marketplace, though not always in royal attire. Sometimes she wore simple civilian clothes, her crystalline hair partially concealed under a hood, attempting to blend in with her subjects. Dean found her disguise amusing, like trying to hide a supernova with tissue paper. Her natural radiance and regal bearing made her stand out regardless of what she wore. However, he appreciated the effort and found himself looking forward to their conversations. "You're not fooling anyone with that look, Your Majesty," he said one morning as she approached his earthen home. "The way you walk screams royalty from a parsec away." She sat down gracefully beside his pot, her shimmering skin catching the morning light. "Perhaps I should learn to hunch from you, Dean Gans. You've elevated it into an art form. 15 years precisely in the military earned me the right to hunch magnificently," he replied, a playful grin spreading across his face. "Though I notice you have finally stopped blocking my sun." "I'm a fast learner," she said, positioning herself so that their shadows didn't intersect, unlike some earthlings who take years to learn proper etiquette. Dean chuckled. "Proper etiquette? Like calling a queen your glimmering magnificence?" It was once, and you know very well it was, your crystalline magnificence, she corrected, trying not to smile. Their banter became a daily ritual, drawing curious glances from passing citizens. The sight of their queen sitting cross-legged beside a clay pot, engaging in light-hearted conversation with a half-naked earthling, became the subject of much gossip. "Tell me," Astria said, her voice turning thoughtful, "what made you choose this life? Your military record speaks of considerable achievements, yet you live here in a pot." "Clay pot," he corrected, "and it's a magnificent one. Sounds great when I sing in the shower." She raised an eyebrow. "You don't have a shower." "Minor detail." He sat up, stretching his muscular arms above his head. "Look, your glimmering magnificence, your crystalline magnificence. I spent years following orders, making split-second decisions that decided who lived and who died, watching too many good people sacrifice everything for causes they barely understood. One day I had enough. I wanted something simpler." Astria studied him intently. "And is this simple enough?" "Simple as it gets. Sun, shelter, the occasional chat with an inquisitive royal." He winked at her. "What more could a man want?" She moved closer, her crystalline hair catching the light in mesmerizing patterns. "Most men want power, riches, status. Most men are fools," he replied softly, suddenly aware of how close she was. Her alien features held an ethereal beauty, stirring something within him that he thought he'd left behind in his military days. "And what about women?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "What do they want?" Dean looked directly into her eyes, noticing that her pupils held an intriguing, prismatic quality. "In my experience, they are usually smarter than men. They know what they want. The question is, do you?" The air between them crackled with unspoken tension. Astria's hand twitched slightly, almost touching his arm before she pulled herself back. "Perhaps," she said, rising gracefully. "That's what I'm here to find out." As she walked away, her civilian disguise doing nothing to conceal her natural grace, Dean found himself watching her departure with more interest than he wanted to admit. That evening, as the twin suns set and the marketplace emptied, Dean noticed a small package near his pot. Inside was a bottle of rare crystalline wine and a note scrawled in elegant script. "For demonstrating the acoustic capabilities of the pot. Your glimmering magnificence." He laughed, shaking his head. The queen was proving to be far more interesting than any simple life he had planned for himself. The diplomatic crisis erupted like a supernova in the pre-dawn hours. Dean was woken by urgent whispers outside his pot. He found Astria in the most unroyal of attire, but her crystalline hair was dimmed to avoid attention. "The Vurian delegation has arrived early," she said without preamble. "They demand an immediate meeting, and Dean, they are not here to negotiate trade." He recognized the strain in her voice, a tone he'd heard countless times before battles. "Invite them in." He gestured towards his pot. The clay pot, though spacious for one, became intimately cozy with two. Astria's natural bioluminescence cast soft patterns on the curved walls as she sat down beside him. "Our intelligence indicates they are here to force a political marriage," she explained. "Their general has apparently decided that I would make a splendid seventh wife." "Seventh?" Dean's jaw tightened. "Ambitious bastard. The Varians have a battle fleet lurking behind our third moon. If I refuse..." She didn't need to finish. Dean felt a surprising surge of possessiveness. In the weeks of conversation, shared wine, and increasingly daring flirtations, he'd grown more attached to her than he wanted to admit. "Your military advisors," he asked, already knowing the answer, "suggest I accept to avoid bloodshed?" Her crystalline features hardened. "I would rather face their fleet." "Then let's give them something to think about." He reached for his old combat tablet, which hadn't seen use since his retirement. "The Varians respect strength and guile. We'll show them both." They spent hours strategizing, heads together in the confined space. Dean couldn't help but notice how her skin seemed to vibrate with subtle light when their hands accidentally brushed, or how her strange alien scent filled his senses. Your military record mentions expertise in psychological warfare, she said, her voice husky. How would you handle this? Rule 1. Know your enemy's weaknesses. He moved closer, pointing deliberately at the tablet. The Varians are obsessed with status and face. We'll use that against them. Their planning sessions stretched throughout the day, punctuated by increasingly charged moments of silence. The confined space, the shared purpose, and their natural chemistry created an atmosphere thick with unspoken desires. As the evening approached, Astria's hand found his arm. I've never met anyone like you, Dean. Most Earthlings I've met are either intimidated by my status or view me as a conquest. Maybe I'm just good at hiding it. He teased, but his voice was soft. No. She moved closer, her crystalline features catching the last rays of sun streaming through the pot's opening. You see me, not the queen, not the alien, just me. The air between them crackled with possibility. Dean had been with alien races before in his military days, but this was different. Astria was not just any alien. She was a woman who challenged and intrigued him, who matched his intellect and saw through the walls he had so carefully built. Your crystalline magnificence, he murmured, his hand lifting to trace. What followed was a revelation of difference and similarity, of alien physiology meeting human passion, of boundaries crossed and new territories explored. Their union was both foreign and familiar, a dance of light and shadow, of crystalline brilliance meeting human warmth. Afterward, as they lay tangled in the comfortable darkness of the pot, Astria traced the patterns on his chest with luminous fingers. The Varations won't reach the palace until morning, she said. Plenty of time to implement our strategy. Dean pulled her closer. Though I'm beginning to think my simple life just got a whole lot more complicated. She laughed, the sound like crystal chimes. A queen and a man living in a pot will either make history or become a cautionary tale. Both. He grinned, kissing her glowing shoulder. Definitely both. Dawn broke over New Athens with a deceptive tranquility. Dean stood in the palace's strategic command center, now wearing a formal military advisor's uniform that Astria had somehow procured. The suit felt alien after months of wearing nothing but his trademark shorts, but the situation called for a certain gravity. The general is approaching, announced a crystal guard, his multifaceted armor catching the morning light. Astria sat regally on her throne, every inch the powerful queen. Only Dean noticed the subtle fluctuation of light in her crystalline hair. The Varian general strode into the throne room like a storm, his massive frame dwarfing the crystal guards. 6 ceremonial wives followed in his wake, each representing a conquered system. Queen Astria, he boomed, your beauty surpasses even the legends. You will make a fine addition to my collection. Dean's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. Their plan required patience. Astria's voice rang clear and cold. Greetings, General. You honor us with your candor. However, there are protocols for such proposals. Protocols? The general laughed. My fleet assures our negotiations remain simple. Ah, yes, your fleet. Astria's crystalline features glittered with dangerous amusement. The one hiding behind our third moon. Interesting, you thought we wouldn't notice. The general's confidence faltered slightly. You were not meant to. Just as we were not meant to notice a structural weakness in your flagship's quantum drive. Dean stepped forward, his military bearing unmistakable, a stance that would fail catastrophically if hit by a precisely calibrated crystalline resonance beam. The general's eyes narrowed. Who is this? My military advisor, Astria stated calmly. Former Earth Federation captain, Dean Gans, specializing in xenotechnology and strategic warfare. Dean saw recognition flicker across the general's face. His reputation from the Centurion campaigns still seemed to hold weight. Perhaps, Astria continued, we should discuss an alternative trade agreement, one that does not involve marriage or threats. The ensuing negotiations were tense but efficient. By midday, the Varian fleet had withdrawn, and a trade agreement beneficial to both sides was signed. The general left with his ego intact and his wife count unchanged. Later, in the privacy of Astria's chambers, Dean found himself pinned against a crystal wall by a very passionate queen. "That was incredible," she breathed, her skin vibrating with excited light. "The way you played him, using your reputation, the way you managed the negotiations was the real victory." "I simply provided tactical leverage," he replied, pulling her closer. Their celebration was passionate and thorough, a fusion of crystal light and human heat that left them both glowing in more ways than one. As they lay together afterward, Astria traced the battle scars on his chest with her luminous fingers. "You realize this changes everything," she murmured. "A queen and her military advisor sharing such intimacies." Dean kissed her forehead. "I thought you'd be more concerned about the biological implications. The human crystal compatibility is not exactly well documented." She chuckled, the sound like tinkling bells. "Our medical science is more advanced than you think. Though I admit human traditional reproductive methods are surprisingly intriguing." "Only surprising?" He raised an eyebrow. "Perhaps I require more data to form a proper conclusion," she teased, pulling him down for another kiss. Their joyful moment was interrupted by an urgent knock at the door. They separated quickly, years of military training and royal protocol taking over. "Your Majesty," a guard called. "The council demands an emergency session. There are rumors." Astria and Dean exchanged glances. Their secret wouldn't stay secret for long. "Well," Dean said, reaching for his uniform, "my simple life in a clay pot just became a lot more complicated." "Any second thoughts?" Astria asked, a hint of vulnerability in her voice. He pulled her close for another kiss. "Never, your glimmering magnificence. Though I might need a bigger pot." The council chamber shimmered like a dismembered geode under the light of the twin suns. 12 crystal elders sat in a semicircle, their ancient faces reflecting centuries of accumulated wisdom. Dean stood beside Astria's throne, maintaining a professional demeanor even though he knew how her skin glowed in private moments. "Your Majesty," Elder Prism began, his voice echoing like crystal striking crystal. "The rumors surrounding your relationship with an earthling advisor require addressing." Astria's composure remained regal, though Dean noticed her light fluctuated slightly. "Indeed, though I do not see how my personal matters affect matters of state." "They affect everything," Elder Facet countered, "especially with the medical reports we received this morning." Dean's head snapped towards Astria. She hadn't mentioned any medical reports. "Your Majesty," the royal physician stepped forward, her crystal form refracting rainbow patterns on the chamber floor. "Your recent examinations have shown unprecedented cellular changes. Human genetic material has integrated with your crystalline matrix." The room erupted in astonished, melodic whispers. Dean struggled to keep his face impassive, even though his mind raced with the implications. "Simply put," the physician continued, "you are carrying a hybrid child, the first of its kind." Dean's military training barely kept him upright. A child? Their passionate encounters had created something entirely new in the galaxy. Astria's voice cut through the chaos like a laser through fog. "Wonderful news. Our kingdoms have long sought a closer bond with the Earth Federation. What better bridge than a child of both worlds? Or what greater disaster?" Elder Facet's crystalline surface darkened with alarm. "We know nothing about such a hybrid." "The risk is mine," Astria interrupted, her voice brooking no argument. "It is my choice of partner." Dean stepped forward, his military bearing taking full effect. "Your concerns are valid, honored council, but consider this. Humanity's greatest strength has always been adaptability. We thrive in impossible situations, turning disadvantages into victories. This child will embody the best of both species." "Fine words," Elder Prism observed, "from a man who lives in a clay pot." "Clay pot," Dean automatically corrected, drawing a surprised ripple of laughter from the younger council members. "And yes, I chose simplicity over power, but that choice came from strength, not weakness." just like my relationship with the Queen comes from mutual respect. He paused, looking at Astria. And love. The room fell silent. Love between species was not unheard of, but to be declared so boldly between a queen and a self-imposed recluse was unprecedented. Astria rose, her crystalline form vibrating with emotion. When this man first came to me, I offered him anything he wanted. He merely asked that I stop blocking his sun. That moment of pure honesty, that total lack of greed or ambition, started this journey. Now we stand before you with news of new life, new possibilities. Will you greet this miracle with fear or with hope? The council chamber buzzed with discussion. Finally, Elder Prism spoke. The child will be carefully monitored, and you, Earthling, must accept a formal position in our court. No more living in pottery. Actually, Dean grinned. I have a better idea. Hours later in the palace gardens, Dean led Astria to a surprise. There, among the blooming crystal formations, stood his clay pot, now expanded and enhanced with crystal accents, creating a unique hybrid home that mirrored their union. You are incorrigible, Astria laughed, her light glowing brighter with joy. I prefer adaptable. He pulled her close, his hand resting on her abdomen where their impossible child was growing. Though I'm keeping the original pot for sentimental reasons. Their kiss sent light dancing throughout the garden. When they finally separated, Astria's expression turned pensive. You realize this is just the beginning. The council will monitor our every move. The galaxy will scrutinize our child's development. Let them, Dean shrugged. We've shocked them already. You by choosing a pot-dwelling recluse, me by somehow snagging the most radiant queen in the galaxy. A few more surprises won't hurt. The first signs of trouble didn't come in an explosion, but in a whisper. Dean noticed the first shift in the marketplace. The way some crystal citizens dimmed their lights when passing his upgraded pot home. The furtive glances and hushed conversations. The pure light movement, Astria explained one evening, her pregnant form casting ethereal patterns on the walls of their hybrid home. A small group that has always advocated for pure crystal lineage. They've gained followers since the news of our child broke. Dean pulled her closer. His protective instincts clashed with his desire to maintain their peaceful life. How serious of a threat? Serious enough, she sighed, her light wavering with anxiety. They've begun calling our child a defilement of the eternal crystal. Their leader, Elder Shard, has quite a following amongst the young crystals, the ones who used to ask me battle stories in the marketplace. Dean raised an eyebrow. Funny how fast allegiances change. A knock at the door interrupted their discussion. Captain Prism, head of the Royal Guard and one of their few trusted allies, entered with urgent news. Your Majesty, the Pure Light movement is gathering at the First Light Temple. Elder Shard is speaking against the defilement of our sacred crystal bloodline. Dean felt Astria tense beside him. The First Light Temple was the most sacred site in their society, where the original crystal consciousness had first manifested. Time to stop playing recluse, Dean murmured, reaching for his old combat gear. The combat gear felt familiar, like meeting an old friend. You are not going alone, Astria declared, her pregnant form glowing with determination. I'm not going alone, he protested, then softened his voice. My love, you are carrying our child, a child that proves their whole philosophy wrong. Let me handle this my way. She touched his face. The First Light Temple soared above the city, its crystal spires catching the light of the twin suns and refracting them into 1,000 rainbow shards. Elder Shard stood before a crowd of young crystals, his form vibrating with fervent energy. Our perfect crystal structure cannot be contaminated by foreign elements, he declared. This abomination growing within our queen? Nice speech, Dean called out, strolling casually through the crowd in his trademark silver-gold shorts. But isn't it a little dramatic? The crowd parted, murmuring. Even after months of his presence, the sight of his bare torso amidst their crystal structures caused a stir. The defiler comes himself, Shard sneered. Here to protect your bastard spawn? Nah. Dean stretched lazily, positioning himself between the crowd and the temple entrance. Just figured I'd share a story about adaptation and strength. See, humans have a wonderful ability. We don't just survive. We thrive by combining the best of everything we encounter. He gestured at the temple behind him. Your ancestors achieved consciousness by adapting to this planet's unique crystal formations. They didn't maintain purity, they evolved. Changed, it grew stronger. Blasphemy. Shard moved to attack, but Dean caught his crystal arm easily. You know what's really funny? Dean continued, his voice echoing across the hushed crowd. When your queen first met me, she offered me anything I wanted. Power, riches, status, all the things you're all so afraid of losing. You know what I asked for? The young crystals leaned forward, their curiosity overcoming their prejudice. I asked her to stop blocking my sun. Dean laughed, the sound resonating across the temple walls. Because sometimes the simplest things are the most precious, like the ability to see beauty and differences, to grow stronger through change. A wave of agreement rippled through the crowd. Some of the young crystals began to glow with embarrassment. Our child, he spoke directly to the crowd, will not be pure human nor pure crystal. It will be something new, something stronger, just like your ancestors were new when they first achieved consciousness in this very temple. Elder Shard sputtered in anger, but his followers were dispersing, many of them approaching Dean with questions about adaptation and human evolution. That evening, as Dean recounted the event to Astria in their pot home, she laughed until her crystal form sparkled with glee. You confronted a radical movement with philosophy and a history lesson, all while half-naked, didn't you? It worked, though. He pulled her closer, feeling the unique energy of their child vibrating between them. Sometimes the best way to shock people is just with simple truth. News of Dean's unconventional victory over the pure light movement spread through the crystal realm faster than a quantum transmission. Within weeks, their upgraded pot home became an unlikely hub of diplomacy, hosting delegations from various crystal colonies, seeking wisdom about adaptation and change. I never thought I'd be running a court from a ceramic hut, Dean muttered one morning, watching a procession of shimmering crystal diplomats approach their home. Astria, now gloriously pregnant, her form radiating pulses of both crystal light and subtle human warmth, chuckled. You mean you didn't plan this when you asked me to move out of your sun? Planning was never my strong suit. He pulled her close, marveling at how their energy seemed to harmonize more with each passing day. I just knew what I didn't want. And now, her crystalline features sparkled mischievously. Now I know exactly what I do want. He murmured, kissing her until her light illuminated the pot. Their moment of intimacy was interrupted by a discreet cough from Captain Prism outside. The luminary delegation has arrived, he said, Your Majesty. Dean still wasn't used to the title, but the council insisted on proper forms of address for their unprecedented situation. He grabbed the formal vest, his sole concession to diplomatic protocol, though he still refused to wear a shirt beneath it. The luminaries were an ancient crystal society from the Outer Rim, known for their strict adherence to traditional forms. Their leader, High Resonance Echo, observed Dean's bare-chested appearance with more amusement than disapproval. We have heard, Echo's harmonized voice echoed in the pot, that you chose simplicity over power yet gained both, that you refused a queen's offer yet won her heart, that you faced prejudice with wisdom instead of force. I just didn't like someone blocking my sun, Dean shrugged, drawing surprised murmurs from the delegation. Our society stands at a crossroads. Echo continued. The younger generation demands change, integration with other species, and evolution in our way of life. The elders fear the loss of identity, the dissolution of crystal purity. We seek balance. Dean glanced at Astria, who gave an encouraging nod. Want to know a secret about balance? He asked, moving to the pot's entrance. Take a look at this. He positioned himself in the doorway, one foot in the sunlight, the other in shadow. Humans learned long ago that you don't have to choose between extremes. You can stand in both light and darkness, taking what is useful from each. A simple metaphor, one of Echo's advisors commented. Simple works, Dean grinned. Look at my home, earth and crystal, earth and light, tradition and new. Our child will be the same, not a dilution of either heritage but a reinforcement of both. Astria moved beside him, her pregnant form casting prismatic patterns on the floor. The first time I met this impossible man, I offered him anything within my power. His simple request for sunlight shocked me, challenged everything I thought I knew about power and desire. And now you carry his child, Echo observed. Now I carry the future, she corrected, her light intensifying. A future that proves we don't have to lose ourselves to grow stronger. The discussion continued late into the evening, ranging from practical governance issues to philosophical questions about identity and change. Dean's blunt wisdom, coupled with Astria's diplomatic skill, seemed to bridge divides that had existed for generations. Later, as they prepared for bed, Astria watched Dean remove his diplomatic vest with clear appreciation. You know, for someone who claims to hate politics, you are surprisingly good at it. I'm not good at politics, he corrected, pulling her into their sleeping alcove. I'm good at being me. People respond to that more than any clever manipulation. Is that what drew you to me? She teased. My reaction to your authentic nature, he replied, kissing her neck, enjoying the way her crystalline skin vibrated under his touch. Sure. That and your radiant personality and how you learned to stop blocking my sun. Their laughter dissolved into sighs as they forgot diplomatic duties in their private joy. Their lovemaking had evolved into something unique, neither purely human nor purely crystal, but a seamless melding of both. Much like the child growing within Astria. As they lay together afterward, their energies still entwined, Dean traced the patterns on her luminous skin. I think we're actually helping them, he said. All these delegations looking for answers. We're showing them possibility. We're showing them possibility, she murmured sleepily. Sometimes that's all people need. A proof that change doesn't mean destruction. That love can bridge any divide. Pretty profound for someone who used to just grant wishes, he teased. Pretty profound for someone who used to just want to sunbathe, she countered. The great confluence coincided with the peak of Helios Prime's summer, when both suns shone at their most intense. Representatives from 23 crystal worlds gathered in New Athens, turning the ancient marketplace into a dazzling display of varied crystal forms and colors. Dean stood at the entrance of their upgraded pot, now expanded to accommodate diplomatic functions while still retaining its humble charm. You'd think they would schedule this for a cooler season, he muttered, watching the crystal delegates shimmer in the intense heat. The heat is exactly why they chose this time, Astria explained, her pregnant form glowing with both crystal light and human warmth. It's when our people are most energized, most receptive to change. Speaking of change, Dean touched her luminous belly, feeling their child's unique signature vibrating beneath his hand. Your medical team says it could be any time now. Perfect timing, she smiled, covering his hand with her own. Our child will be born during the largest gathering of crystal societies ever recorded. Even the Varians sent an observer. Dean grinned, remembering their first diplomatic victory together. That must grate on the general's nerves. Their intimate moment was interrupted by the arrival of Captain Prism. The opening ceremony begins in an hour, Your Majesties, and there's a development. Dean recognized the captain's tone from countless military briefings. What kind of development? Elder Shard has returned. He has requested to speak at the summit. Astria's light flickered with anxiety, but Dean only smiled. Perfect. Let him speak. Are you sure? She asked, searching his face. Trust me. He kissed her forehead. Sometimes the best way to deal with opposition is to put it center stage. The first light temple, now serving as the summit's focal point, vibrated with crystal energy as delegates from across the galaxy filled its ancient halls. Elder Shard stood before them, his form rigid with practiced solemnity. "Honored representatives," he began. "We stand at a crucial moment in crystal history. Our pure heritage." A sudden gasp from the audience interrupted his speech. All eyes turned to Astria, who had just entered with Dean. Her pregnant form seemed to capture and amplify the temple's light, creating a display of color and energy that left even the most ancient delegates awestruck. Dean guided her to their place of honor, deliberately taking his time, making sure everyone saw their queen in all her hybrid glory. Her crystalline structure now contained subtle swirls of human biology, creating patterns never seen before in her species. "Please continue, Elder," Dean called out, still standing next to his queen. "You were talking about purity?" Shard hesitated, his prepared speech suddenly meaningless in the face of such evident beauty. Actually, Dean addressed the assembled delegates, his bare chest and simple shorts a stark contrast to their ornate forms. "Let me tell you a story about purity, about a queen who offered unlimited power to a simple man, and how his pure honesty shocked her into seeing beyond traditional expectations." The room fell silent as Dean recounted their story, not as a political statement, but as a love story. He spoke about simple desires, about sunlight and truth, about how the purest forms of connection transcend physical differences. As he was speaking, Astria suddenly gripped his hand, her crystal form vibrating with a new surge of energy. The medical team sprang into action. "Perfect timing, baby," Dean murmured, supporting his wife as the birthing process began. What followed was unprecedented in crystal history. Instead of retreating to private chambers, Astria insisted on remaining in the temple. "Let them see," she managed to say between surges of energy. "Let them witness what love can create." The birth of their child became the defining moment of the summit as the assembled delegates watched in awe. A new life form emerged, neither purely crystal nor purely human, but a seamless fusion of both. The child's skin shifted between crystalline transparency and human opacity, her small form radiating both light and warmth. "Well," Dean cradled his child in his arms while supporting his exhausted wife, "I guess this puts a new perspective on pure heritage." The temple erupted in harmonious sounds of celebration. Even Elder Shard approached, his previous rigidity softened with awe. "I was wrong," he admitted, studying the child's unique features. "This is not contamination, but evolution." The birth of Dean and Astria's child, whom they named Aurora for her ability to shift between crystal light and human warmth, became a galactic phenomenon that even Dean's famed simplicity could not avoid. Their upgraded pot home became a place of pilgrimage for species far beyond the crystal world. "We've got Andromedans in the market," Captain Prism reported one morning, "and a delegation of quantum collective beings is requesting an audience." Dean held Aurora while Astria dealt with official correspondence. "Oh, what happened to my quiet retirement? You shocked a queen with honesty," Astria reminded him, her postpartum glow even more captivating than before. "Did you really expect the universe to ignore that?" "I expected to sunbathe," he grumbled good-naturedly, watching Aurora's skin shift between states. "By the way, Astria laughed, already moving out of his sun. Some routines remained unchanged, even with their elevated status. The Andromeda delegation came first, their liquid forms contained within environmental suits. Their leader, Ambassador Flux, observed Aurora with multiple sensory organs. "Your child represents possibility," Flux's translator vibrated. "Our species has long feared that mixing genetic material would dilute our essence, but she proves integration can amplify strength." Dean shifted Aurora to his shoulder, where she immediately shifted to her crystal form, refracting sunlight across the pot walls. "Want to know a secret? Stop thinking about strength and weakness, purity and dilution. Start thinking about love." "Love?" The Andromeda form rippled in confusion. "Yeah, love," Dean grinned. "When I first met Astria, I didn't see a crystal queen or a potential political alliance. I saw someone blocking my sun. My honesty shocked her, but her response to that honesty, that's what made everything else possible. The quantum collective beings arrived while the Andromedans were still processing the concept. Their representative existed simultaneously in multiple possible states, which gave Dean a headache until he stopped trying to focus on any single version. We calculate infinite possibilities, the collective intoned, but your path defies statistical modeling. An earthling chooses simplicity over power. A queen embraces that simplicity. The variables indicate impossibility. That's because you're calculating wrong. Dean cuddled Aurora as she began to fuss. Some things cannot be measured by probability, like what it feels like when someone sees past all your defenses and loves what they find. Astria moved beside him, her crystal form blending with his human warmth in a way that still made his heart skip a beat. Or how the right person can make you question everything you thought you knew about power and happiness. Their visitors watched in awe as the family's energies synchronized, creating patterns of light and shadow that seemed to dance within the pot space. Your home, Flux observed, remains partly earthen despite your status. Because it's home, Dean said simply. Just like I'm still the guy who chose to live in a pot and Astria is still the queen, shocked by simple honesty. Adding crystal doesn't change the core of it, it enhanced it. The quantum collective's possible states temporarily coalesced. Like your child has enhanced both species. Oh, exactly, Astria smiled. Though I think she enhanced us more than we enhanced her. As if understanding she was the topic of discussion, Aurora shifted to her human form and reached for her mother. The shift between parents created a brief light show that left their visitors vibrating with excitement. That evening, after the delegations had departed and Aurora was asleep in her specially designed crystal earth crib, Dean and Astria shared a rare moment of privacy. Remember when you offered me anything I wanted? Dean asked, pulling her close. Remember when all you wanted was sun? She countered, her crystalline form melting into his human warmth. It's still all I want, he murmured into her neck. Well, that and the sunshine in you. Their lovemaking that night was particularly tender, a celebration of how far they had come since their first shocking encounter. Their energies merged in ways that still surprised them, proving that even the most familiar connections could reveal new depths. A year after Aurora's birth, the new Athens marketplace had evolved into something unprecedented. A galactic diplomatic hub centered around a clay pot. Dean stood in his familiar spot in the doorway, watching representatives from warring species discuss peace under the warmth of the twin suns. You know what's funny? He said to Astria, who was teaching Aurora to shift her crystal patterns in the morning light. All these advanced civilizations come to a man in a pot looking for wisdom. Not just any man in a pot, she corrected, her crystalline form blending with human warmth as she moved closer. The man who shocked a queen by asking her to move out of his sun. The Galactic Council had recently designated their upgraded home a neutral zone for interspecies negotiations. Somehow, Dean's straightforward approach to complicated issues had become legendary across multiple star systems. The Centurion-Rut-Jellian peace talks begin in an hour, Captain Prism announced, his crystal armor catching the light. Both delegations requested your unique perspective. Dean sighed dramatically. Can't they just share my sun and be done with it? If only diplomacy were that simple, Astria laughed, then paused pensively. Though the ensuing peace talks did become another chapter in their evolving story. The Centurions and the Regalians, locked in a centuries-long resource war, found themselves negotiating in a clay pot while a man in silver-gold shorts explained the philosophy of sharing sunlight. You are fighting over energy rights, Dean observed, bouncing Aurora on his knee as she shifted between her human and crystal forms. But look at my daughter. Crystalline light and human warmth exist in perfect harmony, not in competition but enhancing each other. The delegates watched in awe as Aurora demonstrated this principle unconsciously, her dual nature creating stunning patterns across the pot's walls. At times, Astria added her diplomatic skills, praising Dean's simple wisdom. The most profound changes come from the most basic truths. By sunset, a new treaty was drafted, based on cooperative energy development rather than competition. As the delegations departed, Dean caught Astria's eye and grinned. "Remember when all I wanted was a quiet retirement? Remember when all I wanted was to grant a wish?" she countered, pulling him close. Their kiss sent light dancing throughout the pot's interior, Aurora giggling at her parents' display of affection. Their love had only deepened with time, each challenge and victory drawing them closer. And later that night, after Aurora was asleep in her crib, they lay together in their private alcove, their energies entwined in a way that was unique yet still felt like magic. "We've changed so much," Astria murmured, tracing the familiar patterns on his chest. "The galaxy, our people, ourselves." "Not everything changed," Dean replied, kissing her crystalline shoulder. "I still love the sun, you still shock me every day, and this pot is still home even with all the modifications. Hey, like us, it evolved without losing its core." He pulled her closer, reveling in how their different forms complemented each other. "Also, I added that diplomatic wing so it wouldn't block our sun." Their laughter melted into sighs as they celebrated their love in their unique way. Crystal light dancing with human warmth, creating patterns that would have shocked their younger selves. Dawn brought new delegations, new challenges, new opportunities to share their unconventional wisdom. But now they faced everything together. The queen who had learned to see beyond power, the warrior who had found peace and simplicity, and their daughter who embodied the best of both worlds. "You know what still amazes me?" Dean asked, watching Aurora create miniature light shows for their visiting diplomats. "How a simple request about sunlight changed everything." "Not the request," Astria corrected, her light glowing brighter with love, "but the honesty behind it. You shocked me into seeing truth instead of power, simplicity instead of complexity, love instead of advantage. And now we're teaching the galaxy the same lesson. Now we're showing them what's possible." She smiled, moving to the side so he could catch the morning light. One sunbeam at a time. Dean pulled her back into the light with him, their family's unique energy signature creating a display that awed their visiting diplomats. In that moment, everything they had become, the leaders, the peacemakers, the pioneers, all traced back to one simple truth. Sometimes the most powerful wish isn't a wish at all, just the simple honesty of a complex universe. And as their story spread across the stars, beings of all species learned to see beyond power and politics, to find beauty in simplicity, strength in difference, and hope in unexpected places, even in a clay pot where an earthling once asked a queen to move out of his sun.